This video is primarily for two categories of people, Rush fans and drummers. So I'm going to talk about my top three things that I have learned and been influenced by from Neil Peart. And if you're a Rush fan, you're likely to get further insight into Neil's playing and some of the things that made him so great. And by that I mean a Rush fan and not a drummer. If you're a drummer, I hope that you will be able to take these things, listen to his playing, and then implement them into your own playing. So if you're not either one of those things, if you're a guitar player or just curious, perfectly fine. I think you'll probably still pick up something that will help you in your creative process. So as I was thinking about the top three things that I got from Neil Peart, I discovered Rush around the time of Moving Pictures. And while I was, a child at that point, I had already been playing drums for several years. And the thing that really stood out to me during that time period, as someone who had been, I started playing like 4 years old or something. Older brother had a drum set and just got on it and just started, playing and kept playing as much as I could. But upon hearing Rush and Neil and getting into his playing and studying his playing and trying to copy his playing at that age, one of the biggest things that I got, thing number one, was his sense of timing and tempo control. And specifically, I think tempo control. He was very, very good at controlling the tempo and being acutely aware of when he was speeding up or slowing down. And he talked about this in interviews a pretty good bit. He would talk about how he could listen to Geddy getting a little bit breathless and realize that he had sped up a little bit, that things might be pushing too fast. And so he would have to control the tempo so we could, bring things back down for the sake of the singer. And for those of you that may not be drummers, I don't know how aware of this you are or aren't, but historically speaking, the primary function of a drummer is to keep tempo control within an ensemble. So if you have, since pop music came about, probably, maybe even way back in our ancestral beginnings of beating on drums, perhaps we were keeping the tempo creators and tempo keepers for dances and things like that. If you imagine us however many hundreds of thousands of years ago, dancing around a fire or something like that, chances are someone was there keeping the tempo. So this has kind of been our function for many, many years. As it's expanded into the idea of a pop band or a rock band or something like that, this is what we've been doing, for sure for maybe the past 100 years or so, something like that. It's shifted a little bit over the past 20, 30 years in terms of now when you look at many modern rock and pop acts, they may all be playing to the same metronome or click track or reference tracks in their headphones. So it may have shifted. So in that sense, drummers that have come up over the past 20 or so years, they have a different sense of time, different perspective on time because they have been working with DAWs, they've been working with metronomes, whereas the previous generation, they may have made a conscious decision to work with metronomes, but they weren't inundated with it in their youth. Now, almost most of the music that we hear, any sort of modern music at all, is very precise in terms of timing. And this is a side note, and the reason I wanted to explain that was to say Neil came up during a time when you had to develop that on your own. You had to sort of become aware of it, and the same thing for me. You had to sort of become aware of it and then develop it, as opposed to growing up with music that's been electronically modified so that everything sounds fairly perfect, which gives you a different sense of time. And then as soon as you start, if you're a drummer, as soon as you start playing drums, you start playing along with these perfect time references. and it gets you into that space a lot more quickly at a lot younger age. And you can hear a difference between a drummer that has come up in that generation versus the older generation, newer versus older. I would say, in my assessment of anikanilles, the new drummer for Rush, she sounds to me, and she is she's a generation before. She sounds to me like she came up during a time working a lot with digital audio workstations, working a lot with sequenced tracks, a lot of emphasis on a metronome probably as well. And so she has a very, very precise time feel, in my opinion. And I'm sure she's worked very hard to develop that as well. But there's a difference in that kind of groove versus Neil had a little bit more of a human groove once you're sort of tuned into it. However, his tempo control was very, very good. Very good. So that's one of the big things that I got from Neil at a young age, was this sense of really realizing it's up to me to control the tempo of the band that I'm playing with. A couple of other examples to just mention here that Neil was influenced by. One would be Keith Moon. So Keith Moon kind of famously would change the tempo based on his mood and whatever other factors may have been going on at that particular show. John Bonham. John Bonham is a great example of someone very aware of tempo control and will sometimes push and or allow the band to speed up and slow down. And my favorite example of this is the release of the BBC Sessions, which is a series of Zeppelin in the BBC and their first few albums or so, and well recorded because it's kind of in a studio, but it's live. But you can really hear them speeding up and slowing down as a unit. And Rush did this to a degree as well. The idea of pushing a little bit faster during exciting times and slowing down and pulling back a little bit during times when you're trying to calm things down and have a little bit more of a foundation. So this is tempo control, and it's huge for drummers, and I think it's something that had a great effect on me, and I heard it during a time, very formidable years, when that's exactly what I needed to hear. Number two is kind of two different things. But I'm going to first talk about what I'm just going to call mirroring. And mirroring can fall into a whole bunch of different categories. But what I really mean is when musicians play either things together at the same time, which we could call unison, or I sometimes call this rhythmic counterpoint, meaning it's like a call and response. Someone will play one figure and somebody else will play another rhythmic figure, and they sort of go back and forth. Well, Rush is famous for this. It's one of the things that makes them so unique, is this, rhythmic changes and these little motifs that each musician creates in the band, and they play off each other, and they catch this one, and this one plays this one, and this one plays this one, and then sometimes they play things together. The thing about this mirroring idea that is next level is to get to the point where you're responding to someone's call or mirroring somebody or playing something in unison. When you're creating your drum parts, you have to first be listening. And this was the more advanced version of this that I eventually realized. As a young person playing the drums, I was just like, oh, this is so cool that I'm playing with the guitar, and now I'm playing with the bass, and we're all playing together. And this is something that it happens in jazz, it happens in classical music, it certainly happens in fusion, it happens in progressive rock. All these different things. Musicians love to have these figures that they play together. It's just so much fun. But the important thing, one of the most important elements of that, is that you have to first hear that there's something to be mirrored, which requires, for the drummer, requires that you really listen. And we have kind of two spectrums of drummers. We have drummers that, on the one hand, might just be a very sort of meat and potatoes kind of drummer, who's playing 1 and 3, 2 and 4, and holding down the beat. And that is perhaps the appropriate thing for certain situations. But on the other end, we may have a drummer that is really listening to the bass and really listening to the guitar and really listening to the vocal, which in most ensembles with a vocal, by the way, in most pop and rock music, for the most part, the vocal is the most important thing. This is kind of a rule of popular music. Not so much in Rush. With Rush, it could be any instrument at any time. Right? The vocals are important, but even when the vocals are shining, it's like you can divert your attention to the guitar so easily, or divert your attention to the drums so easily, or the bass so easily. And that was one of the it's one of the beautiful things about their music. But in general, the drummer has to be listening to these things to think about whether or not they should be calling and responding. And a lot of drummers may think of themselves as just timekeepers, just keeping it basic. And that's totally fine. But it is a different kind of drumming, and I would say a different level of drumming. It would be maybe better is not the right word, but a higher level if you can get to the point where you're hearing these instruments, and if you choose not to respond to them and you choose to play in a very basic way, totally fine. This is one of the reasons why I encourage all of my students to learn another instrument. And if you're a drummer, on number 2, when it comes to mirroring and listening, those two things, just learn another instrument. Guitar, if you sing, keep on doing that, developing that, thinking about that, piano, bass, whatever. Just another thing don't just play drums, because by playing some sort of melodic instrument, it will open up your sensibility about the musicians that are going on around you, and it will make you a much better drummer. This is something that I've been hired for many times, is because of my sensitivity and ability to support a vocal or to support a guitar line or something like that. So mirroring and listening, that's such a cool one. The third thing that I want to talk about is probably the top thing that has influenced me and has been a thread throughout my playing and has affected my playing and influenced my playing. And this is Neil Peart as the composer. So flat out, I'm just going to make a statement here and say that Neil Peart was a composer. 100%. His chosen instrument to compose on, for the most part, was what we call non-pitched percussion, although he played a lot of pitched percussion as well, as we all know if you're a Rush fan. Pitched percussion would be the xylophone, the bells, things like that, anything with a pitch to it. Typically, we call the snare drum and the bass drum and the tom-toms non-pitched percussion. But this is one of the things that Neil did that was different from a lot of other drummers, was his parts had very much a beginning, a middle, and an end. They had a crescendo. They had they would build and build and build, and then go down and build and down and build. They had motifs, which are little rhythmic phrases that you can repeat and change and expand upon. And I was looking around at a bit about this because, drummers that have dug deeply into Neil's playing kind of know this already, and I'm sure a lot of fans that aren't drummers know this as well. But Neil as a composer is, I think, the thing that has stuck with me the most through the years. I don't play anything like Neil now. I probably stopped playing like him maybe when I was in my late teens or something like that. But for sure, this is something that has that I've carried with me throughout my drumming career. And I looked up a few quotes about Neil, and have a little video I want to play you too in just a second of Neil talking a little bit about something about this. His early influences, Bonham, Mitch Mitchell, Keith Moon. He said, those English guys really turned me on to drumming as a musical voice. Not just keeping time, but expressing something. So that's kind of what we've been talking about a little bit here, right? He said, in reference to guys like Bill Bruford and Phil Collins and Billy Cobham, Steve Gadd, Tony Williams, he said, fusion players showed me that the drums could be a part of the architecture of the music, not just the foundation. So that's a great way to articulate what I've been talking about here. And even when you're playing something simple, we can't always shred along with the vocals or shred along with the guitar or shred along with what the bass is doing. But the awareness of that and the ability to subtly accentuate what's going on around you, even if you're called to do something that's very simple, the ability to just lean in a little bit, accent here, can be so powerful when it comes to playing even simple things. And when it comes to this idea of Neil as the composer, a couple of things that I wanted to mention on that was, he said he referenced in various interviews, he referenced composers like Stravinsky and Holst, especially the planets, who inspired Rush's interest in cosmic themes. His sense of structure and dynamics extended in extended Rush pieces like La Villa, La Strangiato, or Natural Science owes something to symphonic form, even if he didn't have formal training. And he did study orchestral percussion with Freddie Gruber in terms of the approach and bringing the sound out of a drum. That's not so much what I'm talking about, but it's certainly an element to this. And from a 1996 Modern Drummer interview, he said, I'm not a classical musician, but I have tremendous respect for the compositional balance in that music. Tension and release, remember that one. Motifs, I mentioned that a minute ago, and development. That's what we try to do in Rush. So you have to understand, it takes a special kind of drummer to be able to do these things. Some drummers go to conservatory and they are absolutely forced, if you're going to get a degree, to study composition. You have to play another instrument. It could be piano is technically pitched percussion, but you have to understand kind of basic music theory. So this is something that even if you didn't have piano lessons as a kid, oh, and by the way, I did look up, he did have piano lessons as a kid. I think I had forgotten that. And so for sure, even though it may have been brief, for sure, that affects, when your brain is forming, just the exposure to music as a melodic structure and pitches and all those things as a young person can be very important. And I think for sure that was a helpful element. As well as he had a drum teacher for a year, famously, when between the ages of 13 and 14, I think. I studied with the drum teacher at a conservatory. But this compositional element, I've got a little clip here I want to show you of Neil talking about. This is in reference to subdivisions specifically. And let's see what he says.
We can say that is kind of an axiom for me, is the technique is always a vehicle, but something that's exciting goes way beyond complication. And the fact that I break out of the discipline of those tight 7/8 figures, and then suddenly it's, a very melodically strong, harmonically strong, and rhythmically a beautiful release. Tension and release is, to me, such an important part of drum parts and music in general. In this case, that's a beautiful example of it. This tightly disciplined 7/8, and then suddenly opens up into this wide open 4/4 part with, again, a lot of action going on, but doesn't feel that way to play it, and thus shouldn't feel that way to listen to it. It should have a sense of release, I think, from the listener's point of view. And physically, yeah, there's so much action on every part of the kit that it's an air drummer's feast. I do understand that.
So this is a great example, and there are more, of him actually talking about approaching drums collaboratively with the band as a composer. And so these three things, hopefully, if you're a Rush fan and not a drummer, hopefully you will have kind of a new understanding of some of the things that Neil did in his music. If you're a drummer, I hope that you'll take these ideas and that you will listen to some Rush music if you haven't heard it in a while, and think about these things: tempo control, this idea of call and response, mirroring, all these things, rhythmic counterpoint, I call it sometimes, when you have one rhythm here and another rhythm here, the call and response. And the fact that you have to be listening to the other musicians carefully and understand what they're doing to be able to call and respond. And this idea of composing your drum parts, having a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a great way to expand your playing and expand the way you think about playing. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you haven't seen my video on Rush's new drummer, Anikanilles, I'll put a link up here, or maybe in the comments. And hope you enjoyed this. Hope to see you soon. Talk to you later.